I remember the most recent experience where it sounds dramatic, but it nearly destroyed me. And I can remember being in tears with colleagues. I was not listening to the feedback of my allies who were saying, this is a toxic relationship. The other person is not going to change. You need to get out. And it nearly destroyed my self-confidence. And I don't ever intend or want to go through that experience again.
Morag, what are the early signs of toxicity that you can pick up in your team?
I needed to forgive that person for being who they are. How do we communicate? And more importantly, how do we disagree in a way that surfaces the real issues? Do I care about you and do I trust you? Leaders don't have the self-confidence to accept that we are work in progress all of our life. Well, the only person that can fix your team is you. If we don't change the conversation, we're not going to change the outcome.
Why do we choose to walk away from workplace relationships? Morag, thank you so much. Such a pleasure having you here.
Gaurav, I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Trust me, I could not wait because I know the subject that we are going to dive deeper into today, it's one of the most critical subjects that we can talk about. It's a subject that I've struggled with in my life. It's a subject that I often talk about, and that is relationships. And we can look at relationship from two different lenses. One is the personal relationships, and the second one is the workplace relationships. So thank you for agreeing to be my guest on the podcast, The X-Funk Drive.
My pleasure. And to be clear, whilst everything I'm sure that you and I talk about, Gaurav, impacts all of our relationships and all facets of our life, where I'm an expert is in those professional relationships, those HR, human resources, appropriate relationships, not romantic relationships, but the relationships that we often overlook, undervalue, but have a direct impact, not just on our success at work, but our happiness and our health in life.
Oh, absolutely. As I often share that more than 50% of our time interacting with people at our workplace. And unless we can have a cordial relationship with them, we'll not be able to perform better, we'll not be able to produce as much as it's expected from us, and we would not be able to be an ease to be with.
Yeah, and I think even using that word cordial, I think is important, Gaurav, because the relationships that we have at work, you may not get to choose who your colleagues are, and you may not even like them, some of them, but you do need to be able to work cordially, respectfully with each other in spite of our differences in order to deliver the business goals that the company, the team, or you are being held accountable for. The tools and techniques that we're going to talk about are important, and think about them for the duration of this project, this team, or whatever. It's not necessarily for life, but how do we find a way to be successful together versus what I've seen happen in too many organizations. I'm trying to win over you or vice versa.
My first question to you is, how do you define this term relationship? And the subsequent question is, how would you differentiate between romantic relationships and workplace relationships?
Okay. Well, so the relationships that we need to be paying attention to at work, and as I think about my own career, some of those are obvious. They are the peers reporting to your boss in the organization that they're in. They are the colleagues in another department, whether it's finance or HR or technology, that you might be working with in a cross-functional team. Those are the usual suspects. And certainly all the research that I've done is that we do a pretty good job of managing up with our boss and managing down to our direct reports if we have them. What we tend to overlook is the health of the relationships with our peers across the organization or across our industry. And so those are the relationships, the ones whom we are dependent on for our success, or the ones on whom they are dependent on me, their success. That's the starting point. And then how do they differ from romantic relationships? We're
Yeah.
still probably going out for dinner. We may be having a virtual cup of coffee together, but it isn't about necessarily getting married, going on a date. But some of those insights still apply in terms of how do you break the ice and go from being just transactional, you do your stuff, I do mine, and we'll be okay, to the transformational, which is knowing your story, knowing that I care about you and your success as much as you do mine. That is where the true test of a professional relationship comes in, especially on the bad days. When things go wrong, maybe you get laid off, maybe the project is going off track. That's when you truly need your allies at work. And if you haven't done the investment and the work beforehand, you can find yourself at that moment of vulnerability exposed.
And that's where you said, that's where you find allies at work. Because while going through your book, I found that word playing a very prominent role. Absolutely. Let's say if this conversation is a masterclass for people who would like to improve their workplace relationships, or if this is a masterclass for all the C-suite executives, how they can foster team play in their teams. This is where I would ask people to take a pause and write down all the stakeholders that you have. And as Morag, that you said, it's not only about people that you are reporting into or people who are reporting into you. Also consider people who are at the same level.
Yes. And often, because we're not in the same room together as frequently, or maybe you're in a different region, it's like, well, out of sight, out of mind. Why would I need to invest in those relationships? But as we've seen time and time again, peer today, boss and colleague tomorrow. And isn't it better to be able to walk into a new team and recognize somebody from a past conversation, or not a room full of strangers, but acquaintances that you can start to build from? And in fact, before this conversation, Gaurav, I was talking with the CEO of a large insurance company, and he was commenting, well, do I really need friends at work? And as CEO, and I'm saying, well, you need them more than ever. Because certainly as you move through your organization, the ability to get the warnings of impending disaster, to have people with the courage to speak truth to you, gets smaller. And so if you don't have a relationship based on trust, and whether you call them friends or confidants or mentors, it's entirely up to you. But it's career limiting potentially for direct reports to give warnings of impending disaster, but it's certainly career limiting for him if he's not getting those either from his directs, his peers, or from the board. And so I think it becomes as important to invest in relationships as we move up and through our career.
You know, interestingly, since you're talking about that, you were talking to a CEO of an insurance company. I'm just wondering, as you move up the ladder, the kind of people that you interact with change. When you are an executive, people who really matter to you to enhance your productivity is your immediate boss. As you're operating in the middle management, and I call that as the backbone of any organization, it becomes more and more important that you learn how to balance, to interact with your reporting manager and people who are reporting into you. And as you just mentioned, your peers as well. As you move up at the top management team, I personally believe it becomes even more important to have genuine good relationship outside your organization as well in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, indeed. Because some of those innovations come from those connections across the industry. And as we know, especially with Gen Z, et cetera, careers are becoming even more mobile. Forget what we used to say around 6 degrees of separation. Today, with LinkedIn and other technology, it's more like 2 degrees of connection. And I talk about this in both my books. You think about how you and I got introduced. It's through social media. So making those connections in the industry does two things. Not only does it elevate the confidence and the brand exposure for the company you work today, but it also elevates your own leadership brand and reputation within the industry, which can but only serve all of us to the better.
Yeah. Let's start from the topic that you started here. So when you said that you were interacting with the CEO of an insurance company, and A lot of listeners for this podcast is at the C-suite level. There are a lot of CXOs who listen to this conversation. There are a lot of coaches who listen to this conversation. What do you think are the important pillars to build genuine relationships, which are beyond transactions, not only within the organization, outside the organization as well?
So it's interesting you asked that, because my first career, I was going to be an engineer, but actually ended up in finance for 15 years. And there, in the work that I was doing with companies and leaders in all sorts of industries at all stages of their life cycle, the two things that predominated was what we do, the product or service that they provided, and the how they organized the systems, the technology, whatever it was to produce those products and services and go to market. And those two items are transactional in their nature. But what I realized, and why I do what I do now, which is to focus on the health of teams and organizations through the power of the professional relationships, is that the companies that were successful in my banking career were the ones that gave as much care and attention to how business got done. And that was who we are as individuals, who we are, and how we relate. How and when do we need to collaborate? How do we communicate? And more importantly, or as importantly, how do we disagree in a way that surfaces the real issues? And we can have that knockdown, drag out argument here in the room. But when we leave this Zoom conversation, we are one united voice to the rest of the organization. And in fact, our relationship is stronger because I now understand where you're coming from, and I understand, more about my own perspective. And it's that bit that is often overlooked. I overlooked it early in my career. I prided myself on being independent. Give me a problem to solve, give me a target to hit, and I'll go do it.
And I'm a problem
you
solver.
need to go. Yeah, exactly. You ask me for advice on something and I have 100 ideas before you've even told me what the problem is. And that is both a strength and a weakness, because the reality is the world of work is the biggest team sport any of us get to play in. We are all dependent on each other, whether as a solopreneur, as I was when I first started SkyTeam, to now as an international leadership firm. We are dependent on our clients and their feedback. We're dependent on those that we may partner with, the more complex projects. We're partnering and relying on our publishers to help us get the book to market. There is nothing that I, Morag, or that we SkyTeam can do that doesn't either impact others or isn't impacted by others. And that is it. So the pillars really for understanding, are we creating an ally relationship, are 4 questions that I ask and I talk about in the book. Number 1 is, can I count on you? Can I count on you to do your stuff and get it back to me on time? It's reactive. Can I depend on you? Then is proactive. Can I depend on you to go the extra mile, to take what I've asked you for and recognize that I might need a little bit more on top, or that there's a spelling mistake on the PowerPoint, or there's a mistake in the formula, and fix it. And this is where a lot of those banking careers stopped and started. Can I count on you? Can I depend on you? The other 2 questions that are important, though, is, do I care about you and do I trust you? And those are the human heart-led pieces. And it has to be 2-way. But I can choose to trust. I can choose to lean into the, how are you doing, Gaurav, versus the, what are you doing? And again, many leaders don't. They mistake small talk as being fluff. They mistake checking in on how somebody's doing and the emotions as weakness. In fact, those are the superpowers of leadership in the 21st century.
Beautiful. So well explained. Thank you for bringing those 4 questions. First question that you said is, can I count on you? Can I depend on you? Do I care about you? And do I trust you? What a beautiful questions, and especially the last 2 questions. Do I care about you? And do I trust you? Morag, you said something so interesting. You mentioned that who you are is how you relate to others. You also mentioned that at one point in time, you were operating from a space of being a problem solver. Very often I come across people who operate from this mindset that I'm a problem solver. And thus, What is not available to them is collaboration. Because the moment they start to collaborate, it's going to be a threat to the identity that they've been holding on to as a problem solver, and somebody else might take away the privilege, the pride of solving that problem. How do these 4 questions help that individual to look deep within, introspect, and look at, if only I can let go of this mindset of a problem solver, I would be able to open up a new world for myself where I'll be able to collaborate with others. I'll be able to enhance my productivity. I'll be able to have another connection that I'll be able to call my own.
So it's interesting to me. There are 2 books that come to mind, written by 2 authors who are an inspiration for me. The first is What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, who also wrote the foreword to Yumi. And then the second is, I liken it as a sister book. It's called How Women Rise by Sally Helgerson.
Sally,
and she's phenomenal, and co-authored by Marshall Goldsmith as well. And both of those books identify behaviors. And when I read them, I'm going, yep, done that one, have that one, that essentially our success is built on. And what can happen is that we get this false correlation between I wore my lucky socks and I got the promotion, so I'm always going to wear my lucky socks when I go for interviews. And to your point, I got promoted because, and certainly as we move through the leadership levels, if you are the only one that's solving the problems, then the chances are that those layers below you that are reporting to you get a learned helplessness. If they aren't learning to identify problems and solve them too, then if you are the strongest and weakest link, then it undermines effectiveness. So I think there is an opportunity every time we move into a new career level, or we move into a new role or a new team, to critically evaluate internally what got me here, and do I need to turn the dial up or down? But also to do a sanity check and ask for the outside in feedback of what are the new rules of engagement that we want on this team or in this company that may also require me to turn the dial up or down on some of these skills that I valued in myself until today. And a lot of leaders don't have the self-confidence to do that and to accept that we are work in progress all of our lives. But better to do that deliberately and thoughtfully than to miss out on the promotion or the opportunity because we didn't adjust to meet the new expectations.
What would you call that? Lack of courage or lack of awareness?
I think
or
it's
both.
a combination.
Or
it's
both.
culpable negligence, but I think about the industries like banking, very traditional, very hierarchical, very, there are rules, and 1 + 1 = 2 in that situation. There is no variance. And so sometimes the environment has led us to believe that this is what work needs to look like. But certainly what we're seeing, and with all of the latest research with Gen Z coming into the workplace, etc., with the pandemic changing the go to work, sit at the office, presenteeism, to work can be done from anywhere, much like this podcast. It is changing some of those implicit rules. And so we as individuals need to own that. So some of it is self-awareness. I just even didn't know that I could ask. And then the second is the choice, the empowerment to make informed choices so that I can be the best version of the leader that I need to be today versus the shadow of the leader I was.
And, since you're talking about, I could be better than the shadow of the leader that I was with, or I was under somebody's shadow. Just wondering, as a leader, what is it that they can do that could help their team members build that awareness, have the courage to walk that path where I would be even willing and committed to be a better version of who I am as an individual, and build and foster genuine relationships?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind there. Firstly, Gaurav, think about your own career. Who are the leaders that you would jump at the chance to work with again that have left a positive impact for you?
For sure.
I mean, who comes to mind for you right now?
Oh, there are a couple of leaders that I've had the great privilege of working with, and they, interestingly, those are the people who have become my mentors today. I continue to go back to them and ask them every time when I'm stuck, because I know deep down that the advice that will come from them or a question that they would ask would make me ponder on things that I've not considered. What a beautiful question you're asking. I think that's how you held the space where I could answer to my question. Thank you.
Well, I challenge everybody listening, think about those best bosses, best colleagues. And I've asked that of thousands of leaders around the world. And it's interesting to me that every time I do this, the answers that come back are rarely about how smart they were or their technical skills. Those are table stakes that get you the job, a seat at the table. But what makes the best leaders memorable are how they made you feel, like their ability to ask questions that made you stop and think versus just trot an answer out. I hear they gave coaching and feedback I needed to hear. They took a risk on me and promoted me when I didn't think I was ready. They were creative. They were fun. I mean, can we even say fun at work? They were fun. They gave me the tough love. They celebrated my successes. And for the people listening, I'm sure you've got other adjectives and words that have come to mind. But how do we build on that? Here's my challenge is you get your phone out, send them a message. Say you were listening to this podcast, ask to think about best bosses and colleagues. And by the way, your name came to mind for me, and here's why. So for you, Gaurav, after this, send a message to your mentor, make the implicit explicit of, I really appreciate what you have done for me, what you do for me, and here's the difference that you've made. And I guarantee the ripple effects strengthen that relationship. But when they go home and tell their significant other or a friend, hey, I got a message today out of the blue from Gaurav and he won't believe what he said, you're now paying it forward. So when you ask me, well, what can you do? Firstly is to think about who do you admire? Let them know you admire them. And then it's so for me, Morag, I mean, there are things that aren't going to feel authentic or natural to me, but what of the things in the leaders I admire can I adapt and adopt for me? That's part one, self-awareness. The second is to do what I did for you, which is to create a space for your teams and the people who work with and for you to have their own epiphanies. So 2 things I do here at Sky Team. One is we start every staff meeting with what we call ripples and joys. And it's a time, and it can take 5 minutes and it can take 55 minutes. And there's only 3 or 4 of us in the team. So, we go as deep as we need to. And a ripple is something that we have done, a project that's moved forward, a workshop we've facilitated, a coaching engagement conversation that went well. And joys can be anything personal or professional that's just made us happy. So the firework display that we had outside of the house yesterday to celebrate July 4th, for example. And what that's done over the 10 years we've been doing it is we've learned more about what motivates and inspires and engages each other than we would have done otherwise. It has brought us closer together as we have faced life challenges and work challenges in a way that wouldn't have happened afterwards. So for those listening, creating a space for people to share their humanness can go a long way to building that sense of belonging and team. Yeah.
Thank you. In fact, it has given the answer to the next question that I wanted to ask you, that because the first part of what you just mentioned resonated with me, because when you mentioned who's that one person who has actually contributed a lot to your life, can I just call that person and say, hey, thank you? And one of the expressions that I often share in all my conversations with all the people who have contributed to my life is I tell them shukran. Shukran means thank you for contributing to my life. I think the second part that you just spoke about is, and that was the question that I had in my mind, that one of the 2 biggest challenges that people have is how to foster team play in the organization. And that keeps a CEO awake at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And you just spoke about that. How can a leader hold the space for the team where the space can create epiphany for them to come together, share their ripples and joys? Just wondering, Morag, what could be the other practices that a leader can bring in their teams to foster team play? Because wherever some people would come together, conflicts are a very natural part of any team, any group. Wherever people will come, there would be conflicts. Now, considering that, what are the practices that a CEO, a leader, can bring in?
It was interesting. I was talking to another leader at a solar company last week who's got a new team, and that team that they have inherited comes with baggage directed at them for work they have or haven't done as well as others might have expected, and baggage within the team about how they have felt neglected by the mysterious they. And you'll know this, Gaurav, at every water cooler in every company, there is always the they. They need to fix this. They should go through this training. They should. Well, the only person that can fix your team is you. And that's not just the team leader. A team's health is down to everybody around that table. But if you have got a team that is somewhat bruised and hesitant because they have not cared about us till now, so why should I bother today? You have to start small to rebuild that confidence. And in the book, I talk about something called a relationship pulse check. And you can use this technique with a team as well. And it's not rocket science, but it may as well be, because it's not something that we do regularly. So the relationship pulse check are 3 questions. And number 1 is, what are we doing well? What do we celebrate? Because then the learning is, how do we do more of that? How do we replicate it? What's not going well? So what do we loathe? What are we frustrated with? Where are the pinch points that are getting in the way of success? And then you can start prioritizing how do we address them? And then what's one thing, because there'll be lists. What's one thing either I can do to help you or this team to be more effective, or what's one thing that we as a team are committed to practicing so that we can get better as a team? And everything else on those flip charts and those lists, you can come back to later in the year. But just pick one thing. And it might be as simple as, you know what, when I'm on a Zoom, I am not going to try to do email. And I've done it. We've all done it. And we think we can get away with it because you can't see my keys moving. But what we can see is your shoulders moving, and we can see that your eyes are moving to the email box. So how about commit to being present? Being in the moment and not distracted by everything else. Because in real life, you would not have been sitting in a meeting room doing emails. So why do we think we can do it on Zoom? So coming back to your question around how do we do it, another way of creating space is to have these questions and ask them regularly. What's working? What's not? What's one thing I or we are committed to doing to help elevate our game? And if you keep asking it regularly, if you keep developing those muscles, you as a leader, your reputation and impact goes up. You as a team, your reputation and impact goes up. It's a win-win.
Let's take one step forward. What's going well? What can be done to improve the relationship? And what's the one thing that we are willing to commit so that we can march ahead, so that we can pick up the momentum? Just wondering, have you come across a situation where you genuinely want to build relationship, where you want to invest in that relationship, where you feel that there is a future that together we can create? And yet the other person is operating from a space of his past or her past, where the person finds it difficult to trust humanity and thus is not willing to, not able to trust you. Now here you're trying your level best and the other person is shrinking in their own shells. How do you deal with the situation like that? Because the other person is operating from her own traumas situation.
I have a two-part answer for that one too. As I was listening to you talk there and describe that situation, it's one I've been in on both sides of the table. And here's what resonated for me and what I've seen work is first leaning into the relationship. So if you've had that conversation that says, hey, we're now moving in this direction, or here are the new expectations, and the person for whatever is resistant, the first time you can just reiterate, we're going this way, here are the new expectations. But the second or the third time, if we don't change the conversation, we're not going to change the outcome. And here it's less about the direction we're going in. It's, Gaurav, we've spoken about the new strategic priorities for the team a couple of times. It seems to me there's something else going on for you. Tell me what's happening for you. So you're not even going to label it. Why are you being resistant? Why are you getting in the way? But it's leaning into the, I care about you. Help me understand what's blocking you from being able to step and be all in with this team, with me, with this organization. And then let them sit. And whatever is said, the most powerful thing you can say in that moment is thank you. And then potentially, and what else? Because you might get the surface level answer, thank you. And what else? Thank you. Because the danger is we hear the message and we'll get defensive, or we'll feel like we've got to do more explaining. And this isn't the time for that. This is the time to show that you care by listening to what the lived experience is, or the baggage, whatever they're bringing with them is getting in the way, and just say thank you. And then you can come back to let me think on that. And why don't we meet next week? And let's talk about how we can get past this together. And now that gives them time to process it and come back to that conversation ready to lean into future success. But I can see. So what's that sparking for you?
Yeah. As much as it sounds easy, it's easy said than done. And I'm just putting myself at the place where I'm saying, hey, I do listen. I do hear what you're saying. And what else? The question that I'm asking myself is, how would I hold my own horses? How would I take care of my own triggers? Because as much as the other person has his or her own traumas, ability or lack of ability to trust, I have my own issues in my life. How would I take care of that? As a leader, Morag, what are the early signs of toxicity that you can pick up in your team? That something might go wrong.
Yeah.
And here is an early sign.
Well, the first one would be when the phone number appears on your phone, or the email appears in your inbox and you haven't even opened it or answered it yet. And already you're going, oh, now what do they want? When you get invited to a meeting and you're looking for reasons not to attend in person because you just don't want to be in the room with them. And the third would be when you're stuck in that Groundhog Day of having the same conversation over and over again and not feeling like you're making progress. Because if we go back to your earlier example of somebody who's not willing to embrace trust or embrace the change, the first time, yes, you can say, hey, what else? What's happening for you? Thank you. What else? But that doesn't mean that you can let it continue indefinitely. You articulate the expectations, and then at some near term, you might need to have that tough conversation that says, Gaurav, we've talked about this a number of times. This is the direction we're moving. You have a choice. You're either joining us and playing by these new rules, or you're choosing not to, in which case, no harm, no foul, but let's find a way to exit you either from the team or the organization. So that takes leadership courage, because none of us like those sort of tough conversations. But if we don't, every time we allow somebody to not show up on the meeting or to miss a goal and not have a conversation about it, you are undermining everything that you're talking about. It's degrading our rules of engagement that at some point just means we're going to be unsuccessful.
So two things you spoke about. One is the early signs of toxicity, where you don't want to be in the same room where, and the second one is the tough conversation that you just spoke about. Just wondering, Morag, have you found yourself in a toxic workplace relationships and the impact it had onto you?
Oh, yes. I may have written 2 books on this topic. I would like to think I have not created that environment, but the reality is, as I look back early in my career, I did. And maybe not the toxicity of a skull and crossbones, everything is doomed, but certainly I have made mistakes in my own career that caused others to hesitate. And I can think about several examples of having a toxic boss or a colleague and the impact it had on me. And I remember the most recent experience where, it sounds dramatic, but it nearly destroyed me. And I can remember being in tears with colleagues, both ashamed of the fact that this relationship was having this impact on me and I was having an emotional outburst, but completely paralyzed as to what to do. I was running on my hamster wheel of, if I just run faster and work harder, the quality of my work will win out and they will see that I am a good person. And it wasn't working. I was not listening to the feedback of my allies who were saying, this is a toxic relationship. The other person is not going to change. You need to get out. And it took me, and it nearly destroyed my self-confidence. It nearly destroyed me. And I don't ever intend or want to go through that experience again. I don't want to create it for others, but more importantly, I am committed to giving all of us the tools and resources so that if we find ourselves at the thin end of the wedge with the warning signs, we can step in early before it becomes as demoralizing as the experience I had.
So sorry to know that. Morag, just wondering, what were you waiting for when you said that I was running and running faster to prove how good a person I am so that I can prove my worth, the good work that I'm doing? What were you waiting for?
Well, I think it goes back to one of your earlier comments about our strengths. I would like to think that I am loyal. I am high integrity. And that situation triggered both of those, but in an unhealthy way. Because to walk away felt disloyal. To walk away questioned my integrity and competence because it would feel like a failure. Whereas repurposing it as to walk away actually is a strength because I recognize how my health, the value I did bring was actually intact, but I was allowing this external story and impact to change it. So does that answer the question? That doesn't really answer the question.
It
but
does.
For all of us, there is an Achilles heel. And sometimes it's a strength that becomes a weakness.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the weakness that just gets picked at. But we need to make a choice. If we're not having fun at work, then
it's not worth it.
Change the work. It's not.
Just wondering, I do understand when you're saying that it was your loyalty, it was your integrity, it was your competence, and moving away from that relationship is equal to failure. I'm sure you did have loyalty towards that person, towards that relationship. The other person might be coming from some kind of a trauma. And it can happen in our families as well. We don't walk away from our families. Why do we choose to walk away from workplace relationships? And it's a question for us to ponder on. I might not, it's a question, as I'm just asking you this question, I'm asking this question for myself as well. So on one hand, when I started the journey in this relationship from a space of, I am committed to your growth. Now, just because it's becoming toxic, it's becoming painful for me, will I let go of that? Is it only a question of loyalty, or is it something deeper?
Dr. Marshall Goldsmith has this great phrase, which I remind myself of in this moment. It's all about forgiveness. And because the problem I had in that moment was essentially this phrase, which is, one is I needed to forgive that person for being who they are. So whether they're coming from trauma, just inept leadership skills, whatever it might be, forgive them for being that way.
And yet, how can we support them?
Oh, well, we'll come to that. The second part of it is I then have to forgive myself for expecting them to be anything else. Because that's part of it. In our head, we think that they just need to listen, or I just need to work harder and then they will get it. Well, no, that isn't. What we need to do is to be able to sit down and say, hey, when you did that in that meeting, when you interrupted me for the 10th time, when you speak to me in that tone, it feels condescending, and this is the impact it's having for me. And asking for what we need. But that's tough again when we're asking our boss, because what might happen? They might fire us. It's hard when we're doing it with peers, because then we're saying, well, they're going to think my ego's so big. Who am I to tell them what to do? But if we can't articulate what success looks like, not just in what we deliver, but how we feel. If I can't articulate my needs, how on earth are you going to be able to meet me where I need you to be? And instead, all I will do then potentially is get resentful because you're not doing what I need you to do, but I've never even asked you to do those things. So we get stuck in this loop and this spiral that invariably is unhealthy and takes us down, all for the sake of one conversation that sets the bar and says, here's what I can give. Like, I'm not going to work weekends. When you email me, continue to email me on the weekend because that's your working style, and I will respond first thing on a Monday. Or I don't work weekends, continue to email me on weekends. I will respond when it's an emergency, so we can define what that means. Otherwise, I'm responding on Monday. So now we've set expectations. I'm not sitting there feeling guilty because you're working hard or I haven't responded. I'm not worried that by not responding, it's going to be a black mark. We've set the ground rules. That's the power of being an ally and a friend at work, is we make those rules of engagement explicit. No hidden agendas. We are all working to the same goals. And again, ideally, having a lot of fun along the way.
Yeah. What I'm listening is that having some kind of humanness in all the relationships. In most of the relationship, we don't set the expectations right. And the other person is marching towards her worldview or his worldview. And I'm operating from my own worldview. And where these two worldviews, they don't come together. And that's what it creates, a gap and a conflict. Having said that, let's take one step forward here, Morag. You know, in the world where we live in today, highly digitalized, just wondering, if I reach out to someone, the other person may assume that I'm approaching that person for some favor, for another transaction. And what if I may genuinely be in connection with this person, or I may want to build a connection with so and so. First question, what can be done while approaching an individual? Second, how can I sustain a connection so that with every passing day, it continues to get stronger and more meaningful?
All right. So just thinking about what order to respond to that in, I can share what I do. So at regular intervals through the year, through life, I will pause and think about what is it that I'm trying to achieve personally and professionally? What are my goals? And then I'll write down who are the people who could help or hinder me in achieving those goals. And you're going to have a long list. And there, what you're looking for are the critical few that need extra care and attention. So those are the people who are in your sphere right now. That might identify who do you need to be staying in touch with. But then there is, to your point, the new folks, the people that you've heard about. Maybe you've met them at a conference. Maybe you've seen them in a Zoom window at a company all hands, but you're not quite sure. But something tells you, I want to get to know that person. And in either case, then you can do scheduled spontaneity. So here's what I mean. On a Zoom, it's really easy to turn up to a meeting. We all look perky. We hit the big red button and I just go, here I am alone in my bedroom office and nobody knows what's going on for me. So two things. If that's you, reach out to somebody. And if it's your team, make sure you're checking in on how people are doing. Because this world makes it harder because we don't have the water cooler conversations. We don't have the walk to and from the office. We don't have the, hey, do you want to go and grab a bit of lunch together? Those opportunities where you can pick up on more of the body language. And then the other thing I'm doing, whether it's the new, I'm challenging folks. In fact, I'm wondering how I can do this. If people connect with me on LinkedIn and say you listen to this conversation with Gaurav, send me a message on LinkedIn and I have a 9-day relationship action plan that I will send to you. It's a PDF. And one of the activities in there is to go meet a stranger. So the next time you're on a company Zoom meeting and you see somebody up there that you just pick one at random, send them a message that says, hey, Gaurav, we were just in that all hands meeting. I don't know, I'd love to spend just 10 minutes learning what you do for the company and understanding how do our worlds intersect and just to get to know you. Everybody can give 10 minutes. So do that. Be more proactive in reaching out and going first. And the same with the folks in the industry at a conference. Hey, can we have 10 minutes for a coffee, virtual or in person? But have a question. I would love your advice on what's the next big thing in e-learning, for example. Everybody likes to help other people. And everybody has 10 minutes. Don't make it an hour. Don't make it forever. Start with 10 minutes. That can be enough. And as you leave, hey, Gaurav, this was so insightful. Can we do this again next month? And before you know it, you're on a cadence. You've got a mentor. You've got a friend. You've got an ally in your company or in your industry.
What a beautiful way to start. Oh, absolutely. I'm just wondering, the few of the relationships that I really cherish in my life, they all started like that. And I think what I'm just picking up right now is the way you use the word cadence, if we can have the regular cadence.
It's intentionality. I mean, I think about one of my best girlfriends here in Colorado. It happened over the photocopier. We bumped into each other. We recognized we had some similarities in our lives and we started meeting socially. I think about some of my business colleagues, chance encounters at conferences where I've been the keynote. And then a few years later, they've remembered and they've reached out to me and asked if I can come help them and their team. But I'll do the same on LinkedIn. I'll look for when people are announcing promotions or moves, and I will comment. Those are all little deposits into relationship bank accounts that you may be able to draw on later.
Yeah. Morag, you've been talking about this ally mindset. Tell me, what is ally mindset and what are the practices that could help us to further strengthen our relationship? Now, here I'm talking about be it a relationship with your colleague, be it a relationship with your people, with those people who are reporting into you, or those leaders that you are reporting into, or even people from the same industry, the stakeholders, the customers. Yeah.
Okay, so we talk about that extensively in the new book, You, Me, We, Why We All Need a Friend at Work and How to Show Up as One. And I invite anybody listening here, if you'd like to take the Ally Mindset profile and get insights into your own results, then you need to go to the URL SKYTEAM, S-K-Y-E, team.cloud, as in the sky, skyteam.cloud/you, me, we.
You, me,
and what
we.
you will, you, me, we. And what you'll find are your personal results around the 5 practices. So in our interviews and in our research and with all the leaders going through our workshops, we distill down what does an ally mindset look like into 5 practices. And we call them practices because that word is both about what we do, but the fact that we always have to practice in order to get better. And an ally is that friend at work, the go-to colleague, the best boss that we talked about earlier on, the one that you go to celebrate successes, but also the person that you turn to when you are unsure or you need help or advice. So the first of the 5 practices is abundance and generosity. And this is all about moving from being independent and a me first mindset to interdependent and we first.
Abundance
so you need
in
to,
generosity.
they're all double
And
barreled
generosity,
for real.
Okay.
So abundance is around, you see success as a scarce resource or abundant. Because if you look at it as a scarce resource, you're going to hoard the talent. You're going to hoard your knowledge. You're not going to be generous with your expertise. You're not going to mentor or give warnings of impending disaster. So you see, they go hand in hand for that reason. So abundance and generosity is about looking out, how can I help you to be better? Because if you are better, then I, by implication, will be better. The second is connection and compassion. Connection is, I can collect names in LinkedIn and a Rolodex. Compassion is all about the caring and knowing your story. This is the human element where we start to build trust. I know about your expertise, your abundance and generosity. You know about mine. Now we know who we are.
Connection and compassion.
Compassion. Because when we have that, then you get to the third, which is courage and vulnerability. And Dr. Brene Brown is the leader on this. But when I know your skills, like you might be the best brain surgeon in the world, but I'm so intimidated by you. But if I've lent in and got to know you, or got to know a friend of a friend who says, oh no, Gaurav's fabulous, you should reach out to him, then courage and vulnerability will allow me to make that first move, to ask for help, to ask for help, to admit when I need help, to take help when it is offered. And when we have courage and vulnerability, you also get then to the fourth element, candor and debate, which is all about speaking the truth. So courage and vulnerability goes into this, because if I've got to say, Gaurav, that is the worst decision ever, that will never work. There's two things. One is the candor. It's not just pull a pin on a grenade and throw it and leave you to, oh my goodness. I've got to lean into the debate and the conversation around that may be the daftest idea I've ever heard, but how do we get something that's going to work for you and the company? So you have to be willing to be part of the conversation, which then leads to the fifth element about action and accountability.
Beautiful.
Because I have worked with so many leaders that talk about taking action, but don't then convert it into doing something. And so action and accountability is individual and collective. Am I role modeling the behaviors that of the leaders I inspire and aspire to be? Am I keeping the right people in the loop, especially in a crisis situation, so that we can move forward together and remove, as you've described, the gap between your worldview and mine, so that we are more closely aligned?
Beautiful. You know, while I was listening to you, it could actually address the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set. When you spoke about abundance and generosity, it's all about the mindset. Where am I operating from? And connection and compassion. And then you spoke about courage and vulnerability. And then you spoke about candor and debate. And the last one is the practice is the action and the accountability. It's very what I would do from that mindset that's going to help me to be a friend at work. Wow. Wow.
Now, here's the thing. You've already heard some of my stories, and Eric, Ruby, and I, we are best friends at work. We co-authored the book, and we all share our personal stories of where we have and where we haven't demonstrated these 5 practices. We're still learning. So abundance and generosity is my standard operating system for the world. I will say, yes, if you come to me with a need, I will be there to help you to solve for it. Now, it becomes an overplayed strength when I keep saying yes to everybody else and not prioritizing my own needs. I can do courage and vulnerability when it comes to business decisions for Sky Team, but courage and vulnerability when I'm getting ready to give tough feedback, I'm a scaredy cat. But I've learned to lean into it and have the conversation anyway, but do it with connection and compassion in a respectful way that allows us to recalibrate our relationship and move forward and be better for it.
Yeah. You know, while I was listening to you, where you spoke about being generous and compassionate, a word that came to my mind, where let's not further deliberate on that word, but I would request our listeners to revisit another conversation where we introduce this concept called compassion fatigue. Now, as Brené Brown speaks about vulnerability, where she speaks about the importance of setting the boundaries in place while you are being vulnerable. Now, here's an invitation to all the listeners. When you are being compassionate to others, there's something called compassion fatigue as well. Now, where you need to set the boundaries, it depends entirely on your maturity, your ability to hold the space for others, where while you are giving, while you are being abundant, while you are being generous to others, just make sure you are being generous to yourself and compassionate to yourself.
Yes, because how to be a friend at work and sharp as one is not just about everybody else. It's how do I be a friend to myself? And listening to you there, Gaurav, it pulls together two threads that we started earlier in the conversation around perhaps the person who is stuck and unable to accept change. And we talked about having the conversation that says, hey, what else is happening for you? Help me understand. Thank you. Well, at some point, as the leader, and in fact, at the weekend, a CEO was just telling me, they set the sand, which is, Gaurav, you have a choice. You're either on this team or you're not. No harm, no foul. But if it's not, and let me know tomorrow, then we're going to make the necessary changes. So as leaders, if somebody who reports to us is not living up to these expectations, we need to call it. It's not enough to be delivering all of the sales quota, but it's clean up on aisle 13 and there are damaged relationships internally and externally. That is undermining your reputation as much as theirs. And then also vice versa. The second thread was when you asked me about my own toxic leader experience. We owe it to ourselves that when we are stuck in those relationships, we're either leaning on our allies because this too shall pass. But if it doesn't, then having a conversation with that person around new expectations. And thirdly, if it really isn't changing, we owe it to ourselves to move to a different team or a different organization, because your health, your happiness, your own career success is dependent on you being a friend to yourself.
That's exactly what I heard. What I'm picking up is that my own relationship with my own self is extremely important. And unless I can invest in that relationship, I'll not be able to complete. And as they say that you cannot pour from an empty cup. So the question to be asked is, how full is my cup? And if it's full of ego, I'll not be able to build relationship. And if it's full of love and care and compassion and kindness for self, I'll be able to spread that. Now, the question is, are you an ease to work with, or are you a disease? Thank you so much, Morag. Such a pleasure having you on this podcast. Genuinely loved this conversation. Shukran.
Shukran to you too.